to an American audience, I can compare it to what happened during the 9/11. It was an event that changed us all.
Today's guest is Damian Pachter, the journalist who in 2015 broke the news regarding the mysterious death of Argentinian prosecutor Alberto Nisman. Nisman was a special prosecutor trusted to investigate the AMIA terrorist bombing, and he had planned to implicate a number of powerful people, including the president of Argentina, in covering up what truly happened. Nisman was found shot dead in his apartment, and the Argentinian intelligence service began to stalk Damian, who then fled the country after a crazy 48 hours, fearing he too would be murdered. We get into all that and more. Enjoy the podcast.
The Way of Will John.
Damian, thanks for being here, man. What's up?
Thank you for inviting me. Everything's okay now. We had a few tough days full of rockets, but here in Tel Aviv. But now we're good. Everything's okay.
It's a weird thing, right? Because you just I spent some time in Ashdod. I almost joined Ashdod, the football club that's there. And while I was there, and I don't think I've ever told this story, I had never really been exposed to the whole rockets can fall out of the sky at any time thing, right? And so we were coming back from training, and one guy who was sitting in the car, he turned on the radio real quick. And obviously, what I didn't know at the time is that he could hear the siren, and that's what he was hearing. And so he turned on the radio, and I'm like, what's this guy doing? Like, why aren't we listening to this cool music? I'm enjoying this. Turns it down, boom, all of a sudden swerves, like the guy who's driving the car realizes also what's up, swerves in. We get into like the shopping mall district area. And everybody runs. I have no idea what's going on, no clue, right? But I see around me, families, kids, everybody's panicking to get inside the mall, like as soon as they can. And as soon as I kind of caught on, like your brain kind of catches on in moments like that, right? Obviously, everything ended up being okay, but I don't know what happened at that specific time. If it had gotten shut down or if it actually had hit. They told us later, but just it's a hard thing to get used to, or maybe it isn't. I don't know. What's it like living there? You just so used to it now, or?
I'd like to think that you can never get used to it. You're downtown. You're in the middle of a civilian area. It's not like you're in the border in some kind of a military construction, an outpost or whatever. You are in the middle of your home, in the middle of your life, doing whatever. And then, like you said, the alarm sounds. And then you just, out of nowhere, you go and you take cover and wish for the best. I can understand totally the first experience, because also my wife, she came from Germany to live with me here in Israel last year. And last year was her first time having to experience such a tough experience. And also this year, now, the last week was her second. And it's not scary for the people who are new. It's scary for everybody, even if people don't like to admit it, because it's not normal to live like that. And that's, I guess, summarize all.
Yeah. I mean, by no means. Why don't you give us a good background on who you are? I mean, you have an interesting story of having to have also, if I understand it right, having to essentially flee Argentina for various reasons. Why don't you bring us up to why that happened and what you're doing now?
Of course. So my name is Damian Pachter. I was born in Argentina in 1984. I'm 38 years old. I was born to a Jewish family in Buenos Aires, the capital of Argentina. I lived there all my childhood until I was 11 years old, when my family decided to migrate to Israel. My parents were back there in divorce. My mother was an architect and my father was a forensic doctor. In 1996, due to the situation in Argentina, the economic situation, and the lack of a good future, according to my mother, for me, she decided that, okay, it's time to move on and go to another place. So she'd been in Israel during the 70s as a volunteer in a kibbutz, which is kind of a, how can I put it? It's kind of a socialist community. And people do their agricultural work. So she already had an idea what it's like to live here. And by 1996, we came here to Tel Aviv. I finish here elementary school, I finish high school, and then I volunteered for the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. For 3 years, I became a fighter. And then when I finished those 3 years in 2006, I went back to live to Argentina to take care of the family of my father, who by then was dead. He died a few months after I arrived to Israel. And I took care of my grandmother and my aunts, who were very old people, 90 years plus, and they didn't have nobody else but me in the world. So I went there, and in the course of that time, I started to learn international relations degree in university with a specialization in journalism. And soon enough, I realized that my international relations degree won't take me anywhere. So I said, okay, where I can do something practical. You know, a doctor goes to the hospital, an architect builds buildings, a football player plays football, but an international relations person, what do they do exactly? So I had kind of an internal dilemma. And I said, okay, let's become a journalist. I like history, I like writing, I like to speak with people. And that's how I decided to go for it. And during the middle of my degree, I got accepted to an internship for the BBC in Buenos Aires. And that's how it started. Then I went to the Associated Press, AP, as a stringer and freelance reporter. And then I became a full-time journalist for the Buenos Aires Herald, which was back then the only newspaper written in English. And this was already 2012. And until 2015, when everything went downhill in a way.
Okay. And we're definitely going to touch on that. I'm curious about, having to also serve, in the Israeli defense and what that was like. As a matter of fact, I mean, obviously we just had on 𝗲𝗟𝗟𝗟, who has an interesting story.
He's my neighbor.
And who's quite the eccentric guy. He's your neighbor.
Yeah,
Okay.
we both live in Jaffa.
Super cool. Okay, in Jaffa, yeah, where the museum is. Super cool guy. Super cool guy. But why don't you then? You say in 2015 everything went downhill. Why?
So I was working as a staff writer for the Buenos Aires Herald. I was mainly dealing with foreign news, meaning, for those people who are not aware exactly, in the newspaper you have several sections. One covers politics, other one covers sports. And I was in charge of the foreign news, everything that had to do with major developments happening worldwide. I had to write them, translate them into a proper English, and write a piece about it. And that was my daily basis routine. However, I also had the points, the subjects that I was more interested in, which was always terrorism, national security, and the intelligence world. Maybe it's something that happened while I was living in Israel, and I got adopted it inside of me. And as you know, during the 90s in Argentina, there were two major bombings. One of them, the first one, was in 1992 against the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires. It was a terror attack carried out by Hezbollah. And it was the first major terrorism act on American continent before 9/11, we're speaking in the 90s. 2 years later, the AMIA Jewish Community Center was blown up as well by another cell of Hezbollah. And I was still living in Argentina back then. So those were I can only, to an American audience, I can compare it to what happened during the 9/11. It was an event that changed us all, especially the Jewish community, because those were attacks aimed against the Jewish community in Argentina. And you kind of start feeling to see things changing around you. I was in a Jewish school. Suddenly we have these huge cement constructions. Suddenly the police was on a daily basis there trying to show presence. So we will feel like more secure. The big metal detectors, they were also put in some of the places. It was very weird. And I think that's something that staying very inside of me, deep inside of me. Just a parenthesis, if you, for example, if you have relatives and one of your relatives dies, you go to this AMIA Jewish Community Center to do the bureaucracy so this person could be buried in the Jewish cemetery. So we all knew this building, or our family members, at least once in their life, they knew it. So it was blown up. And there was a prosecutor whose name was Alberto Nisman. He was investigating these attacks. In 2006, he's appointed to lead the investigation, trying to see who was responsible for it, both in the planning level and the people who took it in the practical level, who execute the attack. And he was appointed by the president back then in 2006, Néstor Kirchner. The guy started his investigation, and fast forward, his wife of this president, Cristina Kirchner, becomes president on 2007. A few years later, while the investigation is keep on going, the government of Argentina decides to reach a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran. And this is very, very problematic to both the Jewish community and above all to the judicial community in Argentina. And why is that? Because the judicial system in Argentina had determined that Iran, through Hezbollah, was responsible for the attacks. So one day we woke up with the news that this government, while there's an investigation still ongoing, decided to reach a deal with them to take out the responsibility of the Iranians involved in this attack for trade benefits.
Now, is the problem that it was a backdoor deal? Is the problem that they just kind of wiped the slate clean and that wasn't going to go well? Or did the people in Argentina or the Jewish community within Argentina feel as if even having any sort of relationship with Iran in that time is basically like traitorous, in the sense like it's a treacherous act to do at that time, considering that they were essentially hand in hand connected with the people that were carrying out the bombing, planning the bombing and stuff like that? Was that the real issue? Or like what then blow it? Like what was the real thing?
Yeah, it's exactly like you mentioned, because the news about an upcoming deal between Iran and Argentina was known by the press, by a journalist called 𝗝𝗢𝗛𝗡 Eliashev. He used to work on the Perfil newspaper, and he's the one who uncovered this entire thing. And he literally did a piece acknowledging that the two states were behind doors negotiating a deal. And that was shocking for the people who lived there.
Okay. And you mentioned, so this is before this happened as well. You served in the Israeli defense. The Israeli defense and all of and then what's the Secret Service is called Mossad, right? Or is that Israeli secret? What's the difference here, actually? You didn't serve in Mossad. You served in the Israeli defense, or did you?
The Mossad is like your CIA.
Okay.
And the IDF is just the regular army with the different branches, Navy, Air Force, and infantry.
Wow. Okay. So what did you do, and what's that like? Like, what were you specializing in, if you can say?
Yeah, of course. I was in a unit called Stinger. It was a Stinger missiles unit. Those are missiles that go from land to air missiles. We carry them on ourselves, and the objective of this unit is to take out helicopters and fighters jets. That's the
Wow.
yeah.
The main objective.
Yeah, which is
Wow.
funny
Okay.
because one of these missiles are taller than me, So it
Okay. So
makes me laugh.
intense training to have to. Yeah. No. I mean, I don't doubt it at all. I mean, we've had a number of service guys who have served in military, CIA, and it's always fun to talk to them about what's going on because it's so different than anything that is going on in what would be an everyday life. Is just a normal civilian, and there's usually a whole lot of dedication, mental toughness, and all this stuff that's required. That you can imagine is required to serve in those things. But I'm curious, as a journalist now, you said you had a focus on terrorism and all this stuff. I've got a real question, which I hope is one that you maybe haven't, but it seems like the war on terror is one that you can't ever win. It seems like the way, at least the way America brands the war on terror is that we continually talking about, and just now we got that guy who was involved in this the September 11th attacks, right? It wasn't really in the zeitgeist at all. I remember pictures of him. I don't know if he has been attributing to any attacks on American soil or anyone outside in maybe in the UK or in the Western world or even in Israel. But it seems like it's this never-ending gift carrot that we can't. I don't know how do we end this? How do we win this war? It's kind of like the war on drugs in the U.S., which is a funny thing because I think sometime in the early 2000s or something, we declared the war on drugs won. I think we declared that we won or something like this. So as a journalist, and how do you see that? Is this just the states using their powers in a way, kind of doing stuff? They are combating. How do you really see terrorism in the world today?
It's a great question, honestly. And I'm not sure that I have all the answers, but if I would be an American and I would be that day in New York when the 9/11 events happened, or in Washington in the Pentagon, or the airplane who crashed in Pennsylvania, it gives you a feeling that, somebody just messed with us. And so what are the really options? Israel has been dealing with this for decades. We have experience in here dealing with terrorism, whether it's from the original PLO or then the more radical religious Islamist movements like Hamas or Hezbollah. So you think, okay, what are my options when I have one of the most stronger armies that ever existed? I'm speaking about the US. So you could
Sure.
see it, go back and, okay, let's do negotiations or something like that, a more diplomatic approach if you want. But I think back then, you didn't have any other choice but to fight it and go into the source of it. Now, was it Iraq the source of it? No, I don't think so. But there was, as I understand it, there was a bigger approach back then by the government of George W. Bush to try to democratize a region, bring democracy to a region which is basically impossible to make it happen back then. But it's not like the American government and the experts, they are stupid or something. You have the biggest brains that the world has ever seen, both as an analyst in whether it's the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, or the military. So I wouldn't underestimate the lack of understanding of the United States in the region. Not at all. I think they realized that they need to send a message that something like happened in 9/11 never happened again. So to go back to your original question, I think you must fight it. That's what you need to do.
Yeah, it's a tough point. I actually, I mean, I agree. And having, obviously, I wasn't terribly directly affected, meaning that I didn't have family or friends that were affected or killed in 9/11. But obviously, I remember it very, very clearly. I remember the mood of the country. You remember everything that's going on. It is just like you wake up in another world, right? You woke up and everything was one way, and then boom, from this day on, everything is different, and it's never gone back to the way it was before. And I think you are definitely right when I think about it, because it's not something that I've generally given a deep thought to, is like what to do. But it does seem that you want to be proactive with someone that's messing with you, in the same sense that kids learn to the bully. You don't just let the bully pick on you over and over and over and over again. Eventually, if you don't either make him disappear or walk away completely, or give it you have to have some sort of option. Maybe you face it. And given America's ability within the military, like you said, the analysts, the amount of things that they have available to them, it makes sense to be on the hunt rather than to be the hunted. So from that aspect, I can completely get it. I think it's quite interesting to see that over the course of now, it's over 20 years, and obviously we can never really know how many attacks have been stopped by what they've done. And I mean, I've talked to some of the experts, and they've obviously said, yes, we are stopping things clearly that you don't hear about, or that you can't hear about, and stuff like that. But there is always going to be the question of, are we overstepping our bounds? Is America overstepping its bounds possibly in these regions? What about the fallout for all the civilians in those regions? The potential to radicalize, kids and people of, who are just, a kid just over there in Iraq doesn't have any of the power of Saddam Hussein's army and is just trying to go to school. And here comes drones, and here come all sorts of things. And it does extend. And I think I would say, apart from the fact that obviously as an American, you want to feel safe and you want to feel that they're taking care of things. America has an interesting ability to be involved in a whole lot. And as you would know, I'm sure as a journalist, you can't pay attention to 50,000 things. And I think if you ask the average American, where are we engaging in conflict and military war? I don't think a single average American could tell you where we've dropped drones, where we're attacking, where there's issues and stuff like that. And so there's always this kind of cat and mouse back and forth game of overreaching. And not to mention, I would definitely want to know what you think about something like the Snowden case, and which is not necessarily related to terrorism, but the reason I'm mentioning that is because a lot of times when there's a threat, this is definitely true throughout history, when there's a threat to the government, or there's a threat to the people, or when at least the people believe there's a threat, governments usually overstep their bounds within what they will do to try and say, okay, we need to protect this. Now we can look at your phones, or we need to protect everybody. Don't worry. You all have to do X, Y, and Z. So how do you feel about the rights in things that are, that the government does, or maybe takes away or extends in order to protect people through terrorism?
I'm more on that aspect specifically. I'm more on the conservative side, in the sense that I am ready to give up some of my individual freedoms if that means that my community, whether it's the neighbor or on the level or in the neighborhood or the level of the bigger levels of it, and at the end a country, will be safer. So I have it's a dilemma, right? Because who sets where your individual rights are passed or not? Who decides that? But in that specific case, because of the, here in Israel, it's basically in a lot of aspects, the data is everywhere by the security forces. They know they can track you if they want, but it's kind of a given reality here. It's not like, for example, in European countries, which the personal data, it's much more sensible. So if it's in order to avoid future attack, of course, me specifically will be ready to give up on some liberties and some rights, but because I don't have nothing to hide. So if somebody listens to my phone, okay. However, I'm speaking specifically about Israel. If we take it to Argentina or Latin America, that goes to a
Okay.
whole different level, same like it happens in another Muslim or Arab countries. The security services in countries which don't have the liberties and the rights of the Western world, for example, Europe or the States, the security services, and I know it on a personal level, they tend to make harm to those who they think are a danger to the system, whether if it's a journalist like myself, whether it's an opposition figure, whether it's somebody who in any way can touch a sensitive nerve that can harm the government or the power as a whole. So it depends where it's been used. That's what I think. There are terrible things that happen all across Latin America by security forces, which they have a long history of just doing whatever they want, basically, kidnapping people, murdering people, disappearing people, whether it is in Mexico, like it happened several times, or all across Latin America. I don't think in the States that's something that's likely to happen. For example, that a prosecutor will charge Joe Biden with treason, and 4 days later, this prosecutor will find himself with a gunshot wound in his head, like it happened in Argentina. Those are the differences.
I see. I mean, the U.S. that's a good transition to something that I wanted to speak about, which is essentially there's a really interesting book that is actually hard to read at times, but it's called The Devil's Chessboard. I'm not sure if you've heard of it. Have you heard of it?
I heard the name. I don't remember it specifically.
It's a book about I believe it's Allen Dulles, who was, I believe, the head of the CIA for a large period of time, and his brother. They were heavily involved within the intelligence community and the CIA in the U.S. Throughout, I believe, I want to say the 60s, 70s, 80s, maybe 50s, 60s, 70s. And it talks a whole lot about the meddling and in foreign countries that the U.S. kind of did throughout that time period. There was a large time period throughout the 60s and 70s where the U.S. was very active in South America and in Central America in trying to make sure who's going to be the next leader, how much of alliance, are they going to be our friend, et cetera. And that's very well documented. Obviously, that's not really a secret anymore. What went on. But to your comment on the journalists and stuff, it is clear because we look at now, and obviously there's a war going on over there in Russia and Ukraine, and it's very clear to most people, obviously, what happens to dissidents against Putin. It's actually quite crazy that you have even civilians. They definitely watch their words. If you watch, I speak Russian. And I watch one of the most. There's some podcasts that are fantastically popular, and these guys, and some of them even outside of the country, still watch what they say. Just you can see that there's a definite understanding that you don't want to cross two bounds. Like some of them are like, I'll speak about it, I'll say what I want to say, but they don't go too far. Whereas you're quite right. The amount of websites and places you can go in the U.S. to find somebody who's mad at Trump or mad at Biden and virtually says everything in the world, even things on both of them that aren't true, that could be even conspiratorial and just not true. We go all about it. And it's a beautiful part about America. And it's also probably an issue, right? Because it distracts you from what's truth to a certain degree. But I would say one of the things that I've probably noticed is that for journalists in the U.S., there is they don't have that fear. I think you're right. I don't think they have the fear of being murdered, disappeared, or their family being in danger for having to speak out. But nonetheless, and you'll have to tell me if you agree with this, there's some sort of line that you're still supposed to go with. And whether that's because the state or the CIA is kind of meddled into whether that's CNN or Fox and has some sort of control to some degree, some influence, let's say, would probably be best. There is, I think, to some degree, you kind of can't push. there still does seem to be a line. It's just not done in a barbaric fashion like it's done in some of these other countries. I don't know. Do you sense that case? I don't know how much you've worked with journalists in the U.S. or.
I didn't work as a journalist in the US, but if the things like you mentioned happen, it's a much more in a subtle way, maybe that's the way to define it. You don't see dozens of people having an issue. You see, for example, Snowden, who was not a journalist, who was a CIA analyst, in a way breaking the trust that he was given and ending in Russia. Now, in the middle of all this, he uncovered tremendous, kind of a tremendous conspiracy against what we talked before, like the security forces that were aimed to defend you. They're actually, apparently, according to what Snowden thinks, they can track you, whoever you are, wherever you are, at any given time. And I think it gives you kind of what he did gave you the scoop, the full picture of what's going on inside the espionage world today and what their capacities are, which were, I always took into, given like the government is listening to my phone when I was in South America. But I can understand somebody who's not used to this suddenly discovers such a big and large plan.
Yeah, and I think that was part of the thing for most Americans was that when you're attacked, it's very easy to when you have a common enemy, it's really easy to see who that is and to say we don't really care what happens to them. The second that I think the Snowden revelations happened and people realized that they could be a part of it, it kind of changed the way it changed the sentiment across the U.S. I think the feeling towards, because I think up until that time, it was very clear that the enemy was outside and that the government was doing its best to do that. And then on a very wide scale, almost overnight, it seemed like every American was being spied on. Everybody wants to, they have all your data. You'd have no rights. And the Patriot Act has changed this. And we could charge you, if we charge you with terrorism, you lose your rights and et cetera. So it is an interesting thing. But to swing things back over to where you're at now, here's a question that you won't have the answer for, I don't think. Peace in the Middle East. Can you project out, if you could project out to have a true, I mean, could we ever look at a world that is going to actually have proper peace where you're at?
Between Israel and Palestinians, for example?
Sure.
I don't believe it's possible. Not in the near future, not in the short term. And the reason for that is that there's such a lack of trust between the sides. There's a lot of hate also. We just finished another round in the Gaza Strip where the IDF bombed basically mainly Islamic Jihad targets and positions. And on the other hand, we got almost 1,000 projectiles coming in from the Gaza Strip in 72 hours. It's 300 rockets falling down on you every single day for 3 days. But I think there are elements that people who analyze this region, because of the political correctness that is going around in the world, or kind of a more progressive point of view, people or experts don't like to focus on one of the main issues here, which is not just a land issue or territory issue. It has deep roots in religious reasons, in beliefs, different systems of beliefs, different from the most basic things of all. And however, with this said, there is also a difference between the rest of the Arab countries. As you know, Israel just made peace and normalization with several Gulf states, which is something that was never seen before. I would never imagine if you would tell me 5 years ago, that one day we will have peace with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates. I would tell you, you're dreaming, man. It's not possible.
Sure.
And I guess there are things that are changing. And why it's different with them and with the Palestinians goes another way. I think there's a generational issue there. We need to make time do its thing, and the old guard leaves this world and the new generation comes. However, experience tells that new generations are more radical, quite the opposite. And as you become more, I guess it's a rule of life in a way, you become more older and you become more moderate and you become more wise. However, in the Palestinian Authority, there hasn't been free elections in 15 years. So that's a big issue also.
I see. So yeah, in one hand, it seems as if, you would expect that as the old guard goes out, the new ones would come in and kind of keep these new progressive, I guess you could say, ideals kind of coming, and that would kind of permeate through society, which is kind of what you would expect to a certain degree. But I was there. I spent a decent amount of time there in Israel, and would you say that it is the general consensus, and I've seen this in a few, not just documentaries, but a few YouTube videos with interviews of Arabs and Jews living within Israel, which was also something that I was unaware of before going there, how that's the case. You only hear and see, when you see it in the U.S., it's only like, okay, Palestinians and Jews are fighting, and Arabs versus the Jews, and there's just this. You don't know, if you don't look in close of it, you don't realize that it's quite diverse when you're actually in the country, and they're living side by side.
Of course.
Right. Yeah. And you wouldn't know this as just an American outside, where you only hear the superficial nature of the conflict. Is it true, or would you say that it's true that I've seen stats as large as like people saying 99% or 90% of the Arabs and Jews living within Israel do not care about this conflict at all, and that there's a smaller 10%, also a 10% people who are possibly in power, that are continuing this, or let's just say a smaller portion of the country and people in power care about the conflict, or are using this conflict to further their power, or they have some sort of ulterior motive for continuing the conflict, and that the majority of the younger people and the majority of people just want to live their life, and they don't have any issues with them. Maybe they have intellectually possible issues. Maybe they understand their religion is at conflict with the others, but they don't want to kill anybody. They don't want to have any problems. You eat your food, I'll eat my food. We're all good. Is that the general consensus, or is that false?
I think that is the case. Most of the people are much more optimistic than me regarding the two-state solutions, for example. And basically what's going on in Israel is that people got tired of wars. And you can see it everywhere, but mainly you can see it through what's going on in the military. Israel didn't have any ground massive operation since 2006, which was with the Second Lebanese War. And why is this? Or why, for example, when Hamas or the Islamic Jihad launched rockets from Gaza, why don't see a big military ground operation there? Well, because the government, but mostly the people, realize that they don't want this anymore. They don't want to send their kids to a pointless military operation in a faraway region and come back in death, in a casket.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's no more support and this is my personal view, there's no more support in Israel for long wars and big infantry maneuvers on other countries. It's done. Mm-hmm. The operations are being carried out by the Air Force and by maybe in the most extreme case, commandos. But I think the time of a big military infantry maneuver is over, unless something really big happens, like, for example, that leaves you without a choice. Political assassination of a prime minister, a massive kidnapping of troops by terror organizations, rockets that fall down on a kindergarten, maybe that could be. And I'm also not sure that that's the case. But my point is that there's not much more support here for infantry maneuvers in Arab countries. I think it's done.
I mean, that's a great thing. I mean, that's great to hear, because I mean, when the sentiment is gone from wanting to carry on a long-term war, the government has to look to other ways to please its constituents. And if they're not up for war, then they got to start figuring, all right, well, we'll help give you better communities, better neighborhoods. And it's like they start to kind of worry about the things that the populace, the people that are going to keep them in power, actually care about. And if they don't care about war, you can't just force a war on them. That's going to get you straight out of power. So in that sense, that's really cool. I'm curious as well. I mean, of all the things that you're writing, and when you're reporting now, do you do long form investigative reporting on sort of certain subjects, or are you covering things just kind of at the surface level, just to try and get them across? And if you are investigating into something long term, what exactly are you digging into right now? What interests you?
Well, I do large investigative pieces, mainly about terrorism in South America.
Okay, explain to me this then. Tell me a little bit about this. Because I don't hear anything about terrorism in South America. Is there an issue, and who's the terrorist, and where's the biggest issue in South America with terrorism?
Well, as we mentioned before, there were two terror attacks that kind of were the big thing of terrorism in that region, which were the 1992 bombing of the Israeli embassy in Buenos Aires and the AMIA Jewish Community Center bombing in 1994, also in Buenos Aires. Now, this investigation that was carried out by this prosecutor that I told you about, Alberto Nisman, who blamed the then President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner in 2015, and 4 days later he was found dead in his bathroom with a gunshot wound in his head, and I'm the one who uncovered this thing, who broke this story. Those are the kind of stories that interest me, everything that has to do with terrorism in South America. And this prosecutor was actually the one who realized in a detailed level the terror cells that were operating since the late 80s in South America. We're speaking about Hezbollah cells under the immunity of Iran, in cooperation with them, sometimes through diplomatic cover. They were sent to several countries in South America, mainly an area that is called the triple border area, which is the border between Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay. There's a very known city there, which is called the West City, the East City, Ciudad del Este. Este is East, that is city, and that's kind of a market for whatever you need. Guns, fake IDs, fake passports, and it's a kind of a free land, a heaven, a paradise for people with...
The city is like that? Sorry?
Yeah, it is right there now, in Paraguay, in the border.
Whoa, okay.
And the investigations show that during the last years, not only it's in the border of Paraguay, in this triple border area, but also in Venezuela, which is run by the President Maduro, the Socialist Party, the Socialist United Party of Venezuela, el PSUV. And this regime is running Venezuela for the last 20 years. And what they do, because they have anti-American ideology and anti-capitalist speech, whoever goes in this access with them, they will be welcome. And this means, for example, guerrilla movements for the neighbors Colombia, and of course, with criminal or terror elements, whether it's Hezbollah or Hamas or people who have ties with them. In a higher level, there's a 20 years strategic bond through a deal that was signed recently between Venezuela and the Islamic Republic of Iran. They are political allies now. Okay, and also Russia is inside of this.
Wow.
So Venezuela has become the most important ally of Iran in South America. And one of the reasons that it's happened is because this change of government in Venezuela that happened in 1999, if I'm not mistaken, the vacuum that US allies left after they lost the government was filled by these movements, by this kind of ideology. So, and because of the history of Latin America, there is an anti-American sentiment residual that is existing there since ages.
What's the giant benefit for Iran and Russia to be so buddy with Venezuela? What do they get out of the deal exactly?
To counter the US influence in that continent, basically.
Okay, that's it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. To just be a thorn in the side for the US, that they still have to fight this proxy war in a certain sense. One of many places, right, where the conflict between those countries is there. Is China involved at all in South America?
Yes, but mostly economically speaking, through investments and not through other means. They buy a lot of stuff. Basically South America is a great exporter of cereals and agricultural stuff. That's their main thing. And China is the biggest buyer of soil, for example, soybeans. And because wherever the US lives, then Russia or China will come in. In South America, it is a fact. And you can see also in other places in the world, in Syria, for example, there's never a vacuum of power. Somebody always comes in.
I see. Yeah, and I mean, of course, that does make sense. It's just China has a different, and I mean, not to speak of, and since I'm not sure how much you've looked into or how much your journalistic work has taken you to deal with issues in China, but that's a whole nother level of, I would say, oppression upon journalists and free speech and things like this. I mean, because they're even, and I know Russia does have a certain potential firewall on the internet, but I think the Russians, they get around that in a certain way. Not that the average Chinese citizen doesn't have access to certain VPN and stuff like this, but it's definitely stronger from at least it appears that it's stronger and stuff like that. And the fact that China has a different approach towards war now, we've had interesting people on here. Dr. Sean McFate, who is a professor of strategy at the Pentagon, came on to talk about that, as well as someone else who was involved in cybersecurity. I'm not really sure. But their attempt at controlling the world or becoming a world superpower is way different than the other two superpowers. America with its innovation and push like this, and Russia with its its force and understanding of where they're at and defending their region in Europe. China has gone with this underhanded, long play, long form of disrupt and kind of come in and to structurally embed themselves in certain communities and societies and stuff like this, to figure out how, of course, as we see now with this with Nancy Pelosi going to visit Taiwan, right? There was a tweet that I guess was deleted saying that they would shoot down her plane. I don't know if you saw that. One of the states, it's not, it was not directly related to the states, but it was another state website, and they actually they deleted the post saying that we would shoot down your plane if you even dare come over there. And so, and just to end it on China before I ask what you think about it, one of the guys that we had on Andrew Bustamante had an interesting theory on what would happen to China and Taiwan in 2024, which was essentially that China is going to invade and take Taiwan in 2024 based on it's part of their, they have this, I think it's 2049, their plan to become a superpower. I'm not sure if it's 2049, but that during the 2024 election, America will be massively divided between what most likely looks like Trump coming back and running again during this period, and whoever will be the Democratic, if it will be Biden or whoever. But America, it's a whole show. Everybody's distracted with it. And because of the current situation and how we dealt with the Russia-Ukraine, where we're helping, but we didn't send forces, and it would be probably hard, to be honest, to engender a whole lot of people to just be like, let's go fight in Ukraine. Let's send troops, let's send ground troops, or it's going to be tough. So at the same sense, when you look at if China was to truly invade Taiwan, average American doesn't know where Taiwan is. They don't know what's going on there. Are you going to be able to drum up anything other than sanctions? And China can basically do this. Who's going to stop them? Russia's not going to bother. And then they can pretty much do it. So I don't know what that sounds like to you, and I don't know how much you dug into China, but I find their whole strategy just incredibly interesting as a country.
Oh, yes. And what you start mentioning, that the fact that the limitations that this regime does, it's a communist party. You don't hear very much peace movements inside of China. You don't hear nothing. If it's not just a cybernetic firewall, it's a physical firewall. Nothing. You don't know nothing that's going on there. And also the invasion of Ukraine started with military exercises first, and then it moved on. As you remember, it was tension for weeks and weeks building up. I was surprised that they actually invade. I'm from the ones that even that have seen all these signs coming up. I said no, it won't happen, and it did. And I'm responsible for foreign affairs in one of the biggest newspapers here, and it's a big fucked up in a way, because you have all the signs that your rational brain refuses to believe that there's going to be a war. And why is that? Because we haven't seen a war in ages. The West has become soft in a way. So these leaders who are much more authoritarian, they know how to exploit this issue. And basically the strategy is, okay, I will conquer, I will move troops, and what the West will do, sanction me? Okay. So how you deal with a guy like Putin, who's ready to move troops to another country like in the old days? So it's very interesting to see what happened also with Taiwan. It's basically interesting to see what happens, how the United States will react. And the United States is in a very compromised position given what happened in Afghanistan. That withdrawal from Afghanistan sent an image of weakness to everybody. So when Putin realized, okay, this is how it is now, maybe I move my piece now and see what happens. And in that assessment was right. If it was an assessment like that, really, I don't know. But in China, it can happen also. In Taiwan, I mean.
I'm really curious to see how it's going to happen. Especially also, there's this the current sentiment under Joe Biden will be very different than it will be, say, if Trump is president again, or if Trump was president, for who he is and for the way that he speaks. And he's the type of guy, at least.
Would you think that Putin would invade Ukraine if Trump was in power?
That is such an interesting question. It's a very big question, because for all the talk of Putin and Trump being together and all the stuff that they're trying to buy them, Trump would hate, at least on this very surface, he would hate to be done one-upped, or to someone to make him appear weak. It just doesn't seem like it's a thing. And so the danger is also, of course, he would have an overreaction, possibly, that could be there. I really don't know. It makes me wonder what it would be like truly if Trump was in power and somebody did some, even China, for instance, as well, because that's also a very big part of his ticket, which is how he deals with China and trade. And that's a big thing for him, the economy and money. That's how he built his brand. He has to be seen to be strong on making money and doing all this stuff. I really don't know. It's a fantastic question. I mean, we'll see. I mean, just like the very first time, I remember in 2016, I had a friend who's also American, and I was playing in Finland at the time, and they were asking us early on, like, is this guy going to win? Like, it's impossible, right? He's going to win. And by then we'd already seen, like, we were telling people, I think maybe, like, it wasn't for us, it wasn't like a crazy thing anymore. It was like, I think maybe this guy could win. And then obviously it happened. And so for it to happen again, there's not a Republican out there that has a stronger following than Trump now still. So if he wins the ticket, it's a mess. I'm not sure what you think about it or how you guys follow it, but it seems crazy. It could happen easily.
According to the polls and the public opinion polls and the support that Biden has right now, which is less than 30% of positive image, it's a question. I think if he runs, I think he will win now. Under these circumstances,
I think it's possible.
That's what I think. I won last time 50 shekels. I bet that he will beat Hillary Clinton. I was right.
Yeah.
Everybody hates me in the office. I used to work with Americans back then.
Yeah. And as I mean, we're just about done here. And as the thing, it's funny because you mentioned Hillary Clinton, and I saw headlines saying she was going to attempt to run again, which would also just be an insane, thing to think that if she were to actually, be on the ticket again and to have Trump versus Hillary, or it would just be, it's a show, and America loves a show, and that's part of the good and bad of America. To be perfectly honest, everything is a show, marketing on steroids, and I don't know what's going to happen. But yeah, I could absolutely see it's no longer. I think that's part of the thing. It's no longer crazy if Trump wins.
Listen, there's kind of a sentiment, especially in the Western world, among more progressive societies, complaining about the power of the United States as a superpower, actually. So when I ask myself, okay, just wait, what happens when China will be in charge of things? And what does it say for your personal freedoms and your personal well-being?
That's so true. That's so true. Because I think people definitely, I mean, it's always easy to look at the person or people or group at the top and say, well, look at all the faults and things like that. But it would be a very big, I mean, if China is the one really making some, the world's decisions on policies and what seems to be the new norms and stuff like that, I don't think anyone who's living in the West would be at all happy about the loss of, if they feel like they have a loss of privacy and freedom now, to live under a truly authoritarian government. I mean, there's no comparison, right? Listen, so we're just about done here. Where can people see all this stuff? I mean, you're all over YouTube actually, and obviously you have the TV and the news stuff. But if people want to see, hear more, do more stuff, do you have a website? Do you have social media? Where can people follow you?
Well, I'm mostly active on Twitter and mostly in Spanish, but I promise to work more on my English tweets. It's at Damian Pachter. They can see me on I24 News. I have a TV show there. And also, well, if you read Hebrew, you can read me on Israel Hayom. Those are the places where I work.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll link to everything. Obviously, listen, it's really, I love these type of conversations because it allows just to it's a perspective that you can't just get. I can't just walk down the street like if I was in the US, just walk down the street and ask somebody, "Hey, how's it going in South America and in Israel, and what's the actual thing?" So I love these conversations because they open up your mind in a way that I think everyone should look to actually try and understand the world, which isn't through just the media, but I think through actual conversation and hearing pointed questions, so you can hear what someone thinks deeply about a subject, rather than just being like, I saw a Facebook post that said goblins were taking over Rwanda. That's what's happening. It just doesn't make any sense. So definitely cool. I appreciate it, man. We'll have to do it some other time. And thanks again.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure and amazing questions. It was really fun.